ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبع الهدى. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters in Islam, welcome back for another hadith discussion. Today we are reviewing the book Hidden Defects in Prophetic Narrations, Al-Kashkuf fi Dhikr al-Hadith al-Ma'lul, and we've currently reached the topic of the different techniques and principles that will aid the student of hadith and aid the student of knowledge in recognizing and discovering hidden defects in prophetic narrations. So today we're going to talk about two more techniques. One technique is how it is very important for the student of hadith to observe the age of the narrator, to try to come to a conclusion about the age of the narrator, and then considering the possibility of that narrator living at the same time of his sheikh and meeting. What is the possibility of him meeting that sheikh? Also taking to know as to where that student, that narrator, heard the narrations from his sheikh, and when he entered the town of the sheikh and started studying under him. By using this technique, the student of hadith can discover what particular chains of narration are connected, what chains of transmission are disconnected. He can discover which narrations are mursal. He can discover tadlis of some of the narrators and irsal al-khafi, which is better known. The hadith is called mursal khafi. And this is when a narrator narrates something or uses a particular type of wording as if he heard a particular narration from someone whom he lived with and who he had the possibility of meeting with, lived in the same era and the same place, but he never actually heard it from him. And this is from the most difficult types of hidden defects to discover in prophetic narration. So knowing these types of chains of narration in the sciences of hadith is extremely important, solely because it could be possible that a narrator and his sheikh lived in the same time in the same place, but they never actually met each other. Or, which is even more difficult to find and discover, they met each other, but the student never heard that specific hadith from that sheikh. SubhanAllah, look at the diqqah of the scholars of hadith, the preciseness and accuracy and detailed scrutiny that the scholars of hadith paid attention to in preserving the sunnah and conveying it and writing it down and memorizing it. Ibn Rajab, he mentioned in his Sharh al-Ilal, he said, from what Imam Ahmad and others used to prove that a narrator did or didn't hear directly from his sheikh is if the narrator narrates from a sheikh who is not from his hometown of the narrator, and he doesn't know he is not from his hometown. So that is kind of like a yellow flag, that when you come across a narrator and he's narrating from a sheikh who is not from the same hometown as the sheikh, this can be a tanbih, like, hey, pay attention to this hadith. Maybe you need to look into this hadith in more detail. And Imam Ahmad, he said, Zarara ibn Awfa, he didn't hear from Tamim ad-Dari. Why? He said this is because Tamim was in Ash-Sham and Zarara was from Al-Basra. So one was from the areas of Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, that area. And Zarara was from Iraq. Abu Hatim said about Muhammad ibn Sirin's narrations from Abu Darda. He said that Muhammad ibn Sirin lived during the time of Abu Darda, but I don't think he met him, because he was in Sham and the other was in Basra. So you see, subhanAllah, how specific these scholars of hadith were in determining where they were when they heard these narrations, how long the narrator spent in that city, and where was his sheikh. Did they meet, even though they may have had the possibility of meeting? They lived in the same era, they traveled through the same places, but did they actually meet? And if they met, did he actually hear this hadith from that sheikh? And a more difficult and inconspicuous type related to this technique or this section or this factor is that it could be that a particular narrator, as I mentioned, sat with the sheikh, but he didn't take or learn any hadith from him at all. And this is why we find that the masters of hadith spoke about narrators who met and sat with their shuyukh, and at the same time pointed out that they didn't hear from them at all, or didn't hear from them certain hadith. And because of this, their narrations were in many cases not accepted and found to have hidden defects. And Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, he also talks about this in his book Sharh al-Ilal. He says, as for what Ibn al-Madini and Imam al-Bukhari said, then it is similar to the meaning of what Imam Ahmad, Abu Zur'a, Abu Hatim, and others mentioned. What they said proves that they consider it a condition that sama', that hearing directly from the sheikh, is established and proved between the student and his sheikh, as Imam al-Shafi'i mentioned as well. So this is why when you open up Tarikh al-Kabir by Imam al-Bukhari, he'll mention those narrators who heard from their sheikh and those whom it hasn't been established that they heard from their shuyukh. And this is actually a key and a tool used to discover some hidden defects in some prophetic narration. And this is why they have spoken about many narrators who actually saw the companions of Allah's Messenger, but they didn't hear any narrations or hadith from them. So their narrations are mursal. This is very important right here. They talk about narrators who actually saw the companions of Allah's Messenger, but they did not hear any narrations from them. And their narrations are considered mursal, such as Al-A'mash, Yahya ibn Abi Kathir, Ayub ibn Aun, Qurra ibn Khalid. All of them saw Anas ibn Malik, but they didn't hear from him directly. They heard from somebody else who heard from Anas ibn Malik. And this is what Abu Hatim, he said, but they didn't hear from him directly. And this is what Abu Hatim said, as well as Abu Zur'a, about Yahya ibn Abi Kathir. And Ahmad said about Yahya, he saw Anas, but I don't know if he actually heard from him directly or not. And Imam Ahmad didn't consider Yahya ibn Abi Kathir's narrations from Anas to be connected based upon him seeing Anas. And seeing someone is stronger than only the possibility of living during the same era. So somebody could live in the same era as their teacher and see their teacher, but they never heard any hadith from them. And for this reason, we find many of the young companions who saw the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but their sama', their hearing directly from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, cannot be established or proven. And even some of their narrations are considered mursal, such as Tariq ibn Shihab and others, because they heard those narrations from other companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but perhaps they didn't mention the other companion that they heard it from. And this is why we find many comments from Shu'bah, from Imam Ahmad, from Ali ibn al-Madini, and those who came after them about them considering narrations to be impaired based upon the defect of not establishing or proving that the student heard directly from his sheikh. And they say this narrator didn't hear from the sheikh, or it is not proven that he heard from this sheikh. So this is very important. When you open up the books of ilm, the books of hadith, you find that the scholars, the imam of Ahlul Hadith, the imam of hadith, they will mention and pay attention to that. The sama', ithbat as-sama', did this narrator hear from this narrator? Or was it just imkaniya or mu'asara? Okay, it's different between sama' and the possibility of him hearing from him. So we take that which is thabit, that which is yaqeen. So it could also be that a narrator sat with a particular scholar, but he only heard a few narrations from him, like Sa'id ibn Musayyib from Umar ibn al-Khattab. And Ibn Rajab, he goes on to say, he says, the majority of the scholars deny that Sa'id heard from Umar. However, Imam Ahmad views that Sa'id saw him and heard from him. And even so, Ahmad still considered his narrations from Umar to be mursal. This is because he only heard a few narrations from Umar ibn al-Khattab. And this was common amongst many of the Imam, so much so Ali ibn al-Madini, he mentioned. He said Abu Sufyan didn't hear directly from Jabir, except for narrations. So subhanAllah, see, Ali ibn al-Madini, he categorized all the narrations and arranged them together, saying, okay, well, Abu Sufyan, he heard all of these directly because there is sami'na or sami'tu. But in only 4 narrations, he didn't hear directly from Jabir. And Imam Ahmad said in Al-Ilal, in his son Abdullah's version, he said Hushaym didn't hear directly from Ayub except 1 hadith. And he said Ghundar didn't hear from Hajjaj except 1 hadith. And he said Sufyan al-Thawri didn't hear directly from Ibn Awn except 1 hadith from Abdullah ibn Shaddad. So these types of hidden defects, brothers and sisters, is the most difficult type of defect to discover. And this is when the narrator or student studies and sits with his sheikh and takes from him a large amount of hadith, a large amount of knowledge. However, he didn't hear from him specific hadith. And this type is the most difficult of all to discover. And only the masters of hadith and their sciences can discover them. But this doesn't mean that the student of hadith and the student of knowledge should not strive to learn the techniques and the principles to help him recognize and discover some of these hidden defects and benefit from the great juhud of our ai of hadith. So the next technique and principle we want to talk about today is the technique related to where the scholar of hadith and the student of hadith learns and starts to become familiar with the different names of the narrators. Okay, he learns the names of the narrators, their kunyas, their nicknames, as well as their lineage. And with tadrib, with constant practice in reading and study, they will come to know the names and the differences of the names and the differences of their tribes and where they are from. Okay, so the student will come to know names that are similar, but the narrators are different, and know the names that are written the same, like salam and salam. Okay, that are written the same, but the pronunciation is different. While knowing their different ranks, their students, their teachers, and when they died and when they were born. So what does this technique do? This technique aids the student of hadith in distinguishing between narrators whose names are similar and distortions that may occur in the chains of narration, and the mixing up of names, also known as mursal khafi. Okay, so you might have some narrators, when you write their name is the same, but when you pronounce their name is different. And that's why it's very important too, when you delve into the books of hadith and specifically the asanid, that you pay attention to the tashkil. You pay attention to the tashkil, right? Imagine previously many of the books, they didn't have the tashkil in the harakat, the dhamma, the kasra, the fatha, the shadda, things like this. And they were just transmitted through sama', through narrating. The teacher would teach it to his student, and then the student, sometimes if he had any difficulty in remembering, he would put the tashkil, the dhamma, the fatha, the kasra on it. But many times they were free from the tashkil on them. And even when you go back to the manuscripts, you don't find many of the manuscripts had tashkil on the names, because it was passed down as a verbal narration where the students would hear it verbally and then memorize it and then pass it down verbally how they heard it from their teachers. The next technique, which is related, we just mentioned manuscripts, is knowing the original books and manuscripts and understanding the ranking of these books in regards to their precision and accuracy, and understanding whether or not they were books that were compiled by the student and then they were compared with the original manuscripts of the author of their sheikh, or were they written by the scholar himself, or were they written down by the student and they weren't compared with the original manuscript of the sheikh. So the books and or manuscripts written by the scholar himself, they're considered to be more precise and accurate. And this can be known by looking at the beginning of the book or manuscript and finding the author's name. Then the manuscripts written by the students of that particular sheikh and reviewed and read to that particular sheikh over and over again. This is known by studying the manuscript and finding, for example, dots. Okay, you might find like a parentheses or a circle with dots in it. And this indicates how many times the student actually read the manuscript to the teacher or attended a gathering with the sheikh there and the students attending. So, for example, in the manuscripts, you might find a circle like this, okay? And if it was heard one time by the sheikh, it would have 1 dot, 2 times, 2 dots, 3 times, 3 dots, 4 times, 4 dots, 5 dots, 6 dots, like this. So a circle like this on the book with those 6 dots means that it was heard or read from the sheikh to the student, and they reviewed it 6 times. So understanding this is very, very important, brothers and sisters. And this technique aids the student of hadith and student of knowledge in discovering mistakes that may have occurred at the hands of some narrators in their original manuscripts. Or did it occur in the manuscripts of their teachers? So, subhanAllah, when we ponder and reflect over the practices of Ahlul Hadith, the people of Hadith, we'll observe that they would sometimes consider some narrations to be defective and contain errors solely because the hadith is not actually in the original manuscripts of the scholar or that scholar, or within the different manuscripts of the students of that particular scholar. You may come across statements such as, we referred back to the book of so-and-so and didn't find the hadith. We referred back to the manuscript of our sheikh, but we didn't find this hadith. So where did this hadith come from? Or they didn't find this particular wording in the matan. Or this narrator never had an authentic copy of the book, and it was never compared with the manuscript of the scholar. It just had a circle like this with no dots on the inside, meaning that it was never read to the sheikh. And we find this, for example, or Al-Hasan ibn Lu'lu al-Warraq. He said, I traveled to Samura or Samara. Okay, this is a city in Iraq. To Ibrahim ibn Abdul Samad al-Hashimi, so that I could hear al-Muwatta. So you see, Muwatta spread from al-Madinah all the way to Iraq. And he went to Iraq to go hear it from him. But I didn't find him to have an original manuscript or book. So I left him and I didn't learn it from him, nor did I recite it to him or hear it being recited to me. So paying attention to the original manuscript of a book was very, very important way of verifying the accuracy of what was being narrated from the sheikh to the student. Al-Hakim mentioned in Al-Ma'rifah, he said, then ponder over and study his usul. the original books and manuscripts, are they old or new? So this is what the student should do when he goes and sits with his sheikh. Because what used to happen in the past is that sometimes the sheikh would convey the hadith verbally many times in a gathering. He would read from his book and then read from his book to the students, and the students would write down what the sheikh was saying. Then afterwards, many times the students would go back to the house of the sheikh and ask the sheikh for the original manuscript, and then compare what they had written down from what they heard from the sheikh to what the sheikh actually has written down in his manuscript. So there has emerged in our time a group of people who buy books and narrate from them as if they heard from their authors, and others who write their names down in the list of attendees of the gatherings of hadith in the old manuscripts during the time that they narrate from these books. So Hakim mentioned this. This was during his time, during the 4th, 5th century, after the Hijrah, that some people would do that. Some of the students would do that. They would buy books and narrate those books as if they heard it from the authors, their shuyukh, when they actually didn't hear. Or, they have at the end of manuscripts, you find that there is a list of sama', of those who attended the gathering of the sheikh during that time. So many times you find people who weren't in the lecture or came after the lecture or after the majlis at-tahdith, they would add their name to the record of those who were listening in the gathering. And there are many instances that scholars of hadith had considered the hadith to be defective solely because they didn't find it in the book of the narrator sheikh or the narrator's book himself. So that's another technique that can assist the student of hadith and the student of knowledge in trying to discover and realize hidden defects. So we'll end our discussion today, and inshallah, the next discussion we will discuss another technique that will assist the student of hadith and student of knowledge in trying to realize and recognize hidden defects in prophetic narrations. And that technique is knowing the most common and popular chains of narration, which we find in many of the books of Mustalah Hadith and those that are frequently repeated in the books of Hadith. So until next time, brothers and sisters, thank you for joining us in Hadith discussion. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.